Good evening. Welcome. I'm Margaret Eichman. I'm the co-chair of the Arts and Culture Committee of the Portland City Club. I'm Margaret Eichman. Now do you hear? Uh-oh, too much. Welcome to our panel discussion tonight. We're going to be hearing from this group of people on the theme of the emerging arts scene in Portland. This event was conceived of by the Arts and Culture Committee of the City Club, which is a standing committee of the club. We're an issues committee. We meet every month, and we welcome any of you to come and join us at our usual meeting place at the City Club offices. Our interest now was to take a field trip away from the downtown core and to come out into the neighborhood and see what's going on in the arts scene. We wanted to know what's happening in the areas that we don't see on a day-to-day basis in the downtown area. We wondered, what is it like to be a new artist in Portland? We wonder if working outside of a large major institution works for these artists. Is Portland a good place to be as a young artist? Can you experiment? Can you find the support that you need in the arts community here? And what can we do to increase the opportunities for young artists? Thank you to City Club, to the members of our committee, to Brian Markovitz, a staff member of City Club and the director of Liminal Theater, for helping organize this event. And thank you to those who sponsored this event and allowed us to broadcast tonight over Portland Cable Access. We thank you for helping us pull together the resources to do that. I'd now like to turn this over to Brian Markovitz, and he will introduce our panel.
Thank you, Margaret. Well, welcome everybody. 4 years ago, well, just about 4 years ago, we had a similar discussion like this at Reed College, where we asked the question, what is the state of the contemporary arts in Portland? And at that time, we had about 150 people come out to ask that question. And we got some ambiguous answers, and it was an evening of a lot of questions, because the scene of the emerging arts was just developing in Portland and just emerging. And I think one thing that we did come to realize in that meeting, one thing that we conclusively left with, was the idea that artists in Portland had not yet had an opportunity to come together and to speak about what they do and how their work progresses and what they hope to have happen with it in Portland. So I thought that it would be a good time, and Margaret and I discussed it with the Arts and Culture Committee, to have another one of these discussions, but to focus in more specifically on a group of artists in town who are really starting to develop professionally, or who are already fairly well developed professionally, and see what drives them, what brings them to the point where they create such great art in this city, and what we can learn from them and what we can take away, and how we can start participating in the arts, and especially the contemporary arts in Portland, on a greater level. In putting this together, I was doing some research on the panelists, and I came across a quotation that James Harrison at the end of the table actually wrote in a recent fall issue of Oregon Humanities Magazine. He was speaking about one of his favorite topics, the Lovejoy Ramp Pillars, and he had a great quote, and I think it's still topical today. He was speaking about art in Portland in the 30s, but I think it's still of a great importance. He said, "By not being in a cultural capital, those who migrated to Portland had a greater freedom to operate out of view of the cultural lens, and hence more artistic latitude, but conversely, less artistic community." I hope that meetings like this and further meetings will expand the cultural and artistic community in Portland. So without any further waiting, I'm going to allow all of our panelists to introduce themselves, to tell you who they are, where they came from, and what they're doing in Portland, and how they describe their work. So we'll start with Kristen Kennedy here, and she is a co-partner in Swallow Press. ×2, a visual arts group. So take it away, Kristen.
Well, as he said, my name's Kristen Kennedy, and I'm half of Swallow Press ×2, which is an artist collaborative that mainly concentrates on putting multiples out onto the street. So making art accessible for people who would feel intimidated by a gallery setting, and renting our own spaces to put on events. So we just completed a large poster project called Lessons in Urban Education, which was plastered on abandoned buildings and on telephone poles in the Portland area. And they all had emotionally loaded phrases like, do I feel this way at home? And a photograph of a person alone on the street. And it was addressing the space in between your home and wherever you're going, and what sort of goes through your mind and how you process that information. But most of what we do is billboards, posters. I'm having a hard time thinking right now.
The billboard project was recently featured in the Portland Art Museum's biennial. Is that correct?
Yes, we entered a proposal to put up a billboard for the Oregon Biennial, and it was accepted, and that was on Madison, Southeast Madison, and 7th, and it said, I think of others and worry. So just something reflective in that ad space that's out there that doesn't have a sales pitch attached to it.
Thanks. I'll introduce you next to Mary Kay Guth. She is a visual artist. Guth, I'm sorry. I was planning all day to say it correctly, and I did the opposite. Well, thank you for coming, and tell us about yourself.
I'm a visual artist here in Portland, and I suppose I can be best described as a mixed media artist. I work both in sculpture and video. And video is fairly new to me. While I've been working in sculpture for the last 5-8 years, I only started working in video about 2 years ago. And I added video to my visual vocabulary for a couple different reasons. Number one, it's, in a sense, it's the language of our time. Most of us here either have grown up with TV or moving image, or it's been a big part of our lives. So we know it. We know how to process it. It's a language we understand. And I decided that I wanted to add it as a tool in which to communicate my ideas. One of the other reasons that I took on video was that one of the subtexts in my work is redundancy and time, and how time can affect our impression or perceptions of things. Most of my work, both sculptural and in video, deals with contemporary mythologies, in particular surrounding the feminine. And what I mean by that are things like ideal innocence or proscriptive space underneath the little girl's dress. Ideas that in a sense have evolved into mythological proportions. And what interests me about these ideas is how many of these mythologies, these contemporary mythologies, have evolved into collective representations or collective truths, ideas that as a society that we've just kind of taken on regardless of the lack of empirical evidence that suggests they're valid. And in my work, I like to pose questions or incite questions that suggest an examination of these ideas. I'm not really an artist of answers, but instead an artist who likes to pose questions.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Our next artist is John Raymond. He is creative director and editor of Plasm Media and Plasm Magazine. And take it away, John.
Okay. Actually, my official title is managing editor of Plasm Magazine. It's a quarterly arts and culture periodical based here in Portland, but that is distributed around the world, and particularly on the West Coast, but all around the country and in Europe and Asia also. Plasm Magazine is part of Plasm Media, which is a larger design organization that deals mostly with graphic design and also typography design. And the magazine is kind of an appendage of that. And all my duties devolve to the magazine itself, and so I'm responsible for putting together the writing and the photography and whatever other inserts we decide to do, and then presenting that to the designers who actually put it together and produce the magazine. Ideally, the magazine serves, I think the way that we conceive of it, as a platform for local and regional artists to engage in a more national and international dialogue with other artists. It's a way that Portland's creative community can bring their voice further and engage in discourses that in the past have been pretty shallow here in town. So ideally, we're working on developing a way, well, also for the artists here to talk to one another. So through reviewing shows and featuring artists' work with some sort of critical accompaniment, we're trying to just create a forum for the artists to talk amongst themselves and get their message out elsewhere.
Great, thank you very much. The last person on the end is James Harrison, and he is an architect and sculptor, and I'll let James tell you about Riga.
Thank you very much. Very worried about the feedback going on in this. Hope it doesn't kill anybody. My name's James Harrison, and I'm part of a arts, architecture, and design firm in town called Riga, and we're about 3.5 years old at this point in time. We actually have our studio right down the street, about 1.5 blocks from Billy Reed's, and we really are focusing very intensively on creating surrealist and experimental and ridiculous works of art and architecture done in a very professional manner. So it's kind of that balance between trying to take work out of the studio, engage the public, engage the urban environment that we're in, trying to make Portland a better, more humane city, trying to foreground what artists can do to be a part of that process so that we're not just coming in at the tail of that as cake decorators, if you will, but we're actually helping to inform our urban environment up front. And our experience has been, how do you meld the artistic desires with the realities of being a business and making those two things not mutually exclusive, but make them reinforce each other so that you can work at an urban scale, which is our real goal. That's enough for now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd also like to introduce the person to my immediate left. This is Trent Moore. He's the co-founder with me of Liminal Performance Group, he and many others. And he is also the technical director at Artist Repertory Theater and a stand-up comedian of all things. Trent's going to help me moderate the program today, and we'll toss questions back and forth to our panelists. So Trent, I'll let you start.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. When you first hear the feedback with your own voice, it's so much more exciting. Well, I think we've all gathered here today as part of the contemporary arts scene, but what is it in your backgrounds or your experience, either in your training or here in the city, that led you to this particular section of the art scene that's led you to where you are as an artist today? Either what was dissatisfactory or satisfactory about where you've come from that's taken you to where you are?
I think in one sense, okay, this is just going to be like being in a ship. It sounds like we're already taped, but I swear we're live up here. There is some disconnect that artists like us, I think, are trying to bridge between what happens in schools, in art schools, and what happens when you're actually out in the community. And you notice that a lot of artists or a lot of people will attempt a career in the arts, but then immediately stop once they hit the economic reality of not having that support system of college or mom and dad or what have you. And how do you keep that going in a viable kind of way? A lot of the schools still kind of teach almost a classical Beaux-Arts tradition of painting, sculpture, as these rarefied mediums that can only occur within the context of a gallery. And I think one of the things that's probably a similarity between all of us is we don't accept that all the time. I think we're all kind of challenging that and looking for other venues to work in, and people have been very, very responsive to that, and that's why, you know, we're able to do it. We couldn't do it in isolation. You have to do it with the support of the community you're in. Otherwise, you'll just frustrate yourself and pick some other path that's easier, because there's enough obstacles to being an artist as it is. So
I think that's something that I think that's something that's developing in Portland right now. I don't know if this is working. I think that I mean, Portland is in some ways a particularly difficult place to have a creative career in that it's not entirely a major media center at this point, and there's not the kind of support network that that larger cities have for artists. And so people who come here to make art end up having to build their own kind of support system in a way that other places won't. And I mean, I guess it goes back to what James, the quote that was quoted from James earlier, that I mean, there is a certain freedom in that, but it also is more work in some ways too. And I think there are certain institutions that have been gelling in town for the last 10 years or so that are creating a greater possibility for artists to have longer and more fertile careers, but it's really only in its infancy, I think, right now.
I think that what's unique about the individuals that are here today are that they come to art in a sense through circuitous paths, and that they approach it, they're not approaching it through the right through the gallery system, but I think that Portland is starting to offer alternatives. That's why I mentioned that I'm doing video, because sculpture is pretty easy to get into a gallery. Video, on the other hand, is not. So either I have to slip it in as part of a sculptural grouping, or I have to look for other venues. And in the last few years, there's developing a momentum here where these options are available. For instance, Pica is starting to offer these types of options. They're bringing in artists from the outside that work, contemporary artists from the outside that work in very polymorphous vocabulary. And there's places like the Feldman Gallery at PNCA that's only a few years old, but it's showing work that doesn't necessarily fit into galleries. And actually tonight there's an opening on a show that is exploring issues surrounding the war in Kosovo. Pretty interesting, certainly not something that's relevant to a gallery. So these things are starting to happen here in Portland. But it's slow, and the momentum's going, and our job, not only as artists, but yours as part of the community, is to keep that going. You know, it's starting, we just gotta keep it going so that we can be like other communities and show not only art in galleries, but show art in lots of different types of venues. And so that people aren't having to work so hard at creating alternative spaces to, you know, get this other art out there. Because right now, these installation art, video, the type of art that Swallow Press does, it's the orthodoxy out there. That's what's happening. It is part of the vernacular. It's part of the vocabulary within a bigger art world. And there's some pretty exciting things happening here that can fit into both of those venues, the gallery and outside of the gallery.
I think it's important that James brought up the element of monetary compensation for artwork, because it's interesting that as we talk about that being important and how we have to build this structure, not many of us are making much money. And we really still continue to do things that don't make us much money because we really believe in them and believe that exposure will bring to a greater support system to uplift these sorts of arts like video and public artworks and alternative magazines, that they will become part of the mainstream like they are nationally and internationally. We seem to have this very provincial town. It's beautiful. It's very accepting of artists, but there is a voice to be heard here on a national and international level, and we shouldn't be afraid of bringing those artists into the community, because they will only increase the dialogue between both areas.
I think what you're saying is important too. I mean, Portland is very accepting of artists. Like, you can pretty much do whatever you want, but it's not very demanding of artists in a certain way, and it's not creating opportunities for artists in this way that other places do. I mean, it's happy to let artists do whatever they want, but as far as challenging artists and presenting them with opportunities that to grow and to build their voice, that's, I think, pretty rare here.
And we shouldn't be scared of that exposure
Right.
from the outside. We should bring it in more.
Right.
And it's only going to challenge us to create more interesting
Right.
pieces of work.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a generally held problem here in town that we've seen for generations of a kind of mid-career slump that people end up having here, where they reach a certain plateau and then the opportunities for developing past what they've done kind of disappear. And I think that threshold is rising. That threshold is rising, but it's still not up there.
But I think part of the reason that occurs is one thing that's really necessary within an art community is that there is a curatorial voice, or there are voices that take these artists outside of the community, be it in written form, like Plasm, and Plasm is doing that in an amazing way, but also curators. You know, there has to be people who travel to other cities that say, hey, there's stuff happening here, there's stuff happening in Portland, come on and see it. These artists are vital, they're doing things that are relevant not only to their region, but to a bigger discourse, to bigger dialogue, artistic dialogue.
Yeah, I think that both Trent and I could probably speak to that from the performance end of things as well. It's very difficult sometimes to develop in a community as small as Portland a sense that live performance can be something more than a categorized form of theater or dance or any of the other categories that one might put it into. And in being in a city like Portland, there is the freedom that we've talked about that is exciting and wonderful because you can do whatever you want. The hard part is the apathy that sometimes accompanies it, because sometimes people don't quite know what to make of, say, a performance that includes video and slide projections and actors who don't actually say anything. And these things kind of commingle, and there are wonderful opportunities for artists to find a voice. And what's interesting is now developing an audience for this voice and getting an audience excited to help us, and a curatorial audience as well, to help us expand this onto a national level. Because when that happens, it seems to me anyways, that Portland will become important in a lot of different ways. And I think it's just part of a growing and developing process for a city.
See, I disagree completely.
Oh, really?
Because I think Portland is already important, whether my mic can pick it up or not. I mean, granted, there's a lot of difficulties to being an artist here, and we want to increase our support networks for sure, but I also think there's tons of local mythology for artists to draw from. We have to work on how we make it economically viable. I think that's part of our job. We have to come up with different methods for doing that. So I think rather than complain about the market, we have to address it head on and try to make it work. Maybe it's got to change from the standard system of the way that galleries work. I mean, I've asked all the kind of hotshot painters in town, like, how many of you make a living just off of painting? And maybe one or two can actually say that, but every other artist that I know does have to be creative about having a job teaching or some other way to supplement their income. But I also think that's really important. We have to find those ways. I mean, like Plasm's trying to do it in, by publishing a magazine. We're trying to do it by being an architecture firm that is a model that works, and parts of that model are very, very different than the standard way. I think we have to open up things like public art, where that is a system that is in place to, and those are high dollar things that's a high dollar program that's available to artists. There are certainly problems with it, and I would say one of the main ones would be artists that apply for public art projects. If you get one, you have to become a business overnight. A lot of artists have trouble doing that. It's a difficult thing. I mean, we went through those growing pains. I think part of our job is to go to other business leaders, and clearly there's people in this room that have that kind of expertise, and say, we need your help in setting up an art-based institution or endeavor. What is it going to take to make it viable to continue to produce artwork? So we have to meet the business community halfway. We want them to meet us halfway, sure, but I don't think we can't complain now with times so economically good. We've got to figure out a way to make them work for artists of the community. And there's a lot of artists that haven't felt the economic benefits yet, but if we can't figure out a way for that to happen now, then forget it, right?
But I think, I don't know, I mean, I think it's a pretty daunting task, though. I mean, I think partly what allows the art world of Los Angeles or New York to exist is that there are these huge industries around them that artists can work in and make money, like whether it's working in the movies or working in the magazine industry or having teaching jobs. And none of that exists here, and I don't see that it's really ever going to. I mean, I think Portland made decisions a long time ago that have kept it small and nice and livable and everything, and I think that's just part of what artists here really need to learn to live with. And I think to assume that Portland is going to grow to a point that it can encompass a certain level of art making, I think is unrealistic. But I mean, not to say that it can't become something exceptional and vibrant, but it's never going to be New York or LA,
And that's not what we're asking.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of it.
Yeah, exactly. Nor should it want to.
We shouldn't be Paris, France,
But also, we have to take ours. I mean, I think this is a great community. I think there's amazing art being produced in this community, and I think that people have to, we have to scream it out loud. And Plasms is one of the ways it's happening, and the articles are one of the ways it's happening. And now, curatorial voice. But, I mean, there's one thing that I was reading in the paper the other day, and Randy Gregg wrote an article on the Whitney Biennial. And the Whitney went to Seattle, went to San Francisco, and these are the people who are curating it, going to look at all these different cities for artists that would be relevant to this very big show. And yet they missed Portland, and Randy mentioned it, and I thought, right on, that's great, because maybe we shouldn't all be waiting to get into the Whitney, but we certainly should believe enough in ourselves that we should say, hey, you guys should be coming here. Because this is a scene, and there are things happening, and it takes a whole community to stand behind their artists, be it funding, be it a voice, whatever, to say that this is a viable community, and people should come here to look.
And it's not so much about economics all the time. I mean, mentioning money is, we all deserve to make our paycheck, but we're not asking anyone to give us a salary for making things look pretty. I mean, we really want to be we want to be part of a community. We want a value placed on what we do. I mean, every artist at this table has participated in an auction, in a benefit for some art organization in town, for some nonprofit in town. And I went to a thing that the mayor held, State of the Arts, and we all sat around and talked about, what we would see, and she had her constituents stand up and talk about how wonderful we were doing, and someone said, what about zoning laws for artist lofts? And she said, oh, no, no, no. And what about this? Oh, no, thanks a lot, sit down, look at what we're doing with the opera or the ballet. But there are all these people moving from the ground up that really want to stay in this town, really want to work, really want to make Portland an exciting place to look at artwork, and we're not getting it back. We're not, there are a few organizations that work really hard, RAC, PICA, but I mean, I'm having a hard time naming a third.
And
So,
Yeah, conspicuously absent is the museum.
yeah.
as always.
Well,
Yeah.
I think that from all of the things that you just started talking about, what I'd like to ask is, in those struggles and in the kind of work that you've produced towards an end, what have you done that you've seen a level of success, not necessarily public success, but success for your goals that has worked, that has communicated your message to the community, or in a way that has developed an interest in the community for what you're doing? What have been some success stories of the things that you've done? And on the converse, what are some things that haven't worked so well, or things that you'd like to see become more accessible for audiences of what you do?
Well, I think that in the particular way that Topher and I work together with Swallow, most of our projects are based to reach an audience that is not going to a gallery show or not going to a museum. Not to say we don't work within those systems as well, but the work that we did started off from a good friend at Kinko's who, you know, we had some copies made and we put some posters up with, you know, ironic, obscure sayings, because that's where we were coming out of art school. It was, you know, irony was king, and we were just kind of moving through there. And then we, you know, with the conversation it developed, you know, we scared a few people. We were sending out anonymous mailings. They thought they were being stalked. You know, it grew. You know, it pushed us to excite people in a different way. And we were new. We didn't know anyone. We were scared of the gallery system. And every project we did pushed us to another level conceptually. I mean, we've grown by leaps and bounds with what we do and the process that we go through to get a completed piece of work. And our audience has also grown. I mean, but we've really had to work. I mean, you know this, press releases. What artist sends out their own press releases? I know I do, and it's not fun. It is not fun to, you know, lick those envelopes and write the blurbs and send them out, but it produced press in other cities. You know, you get a website up and people start emailing you and you start sending things out to people you don't know because you want to draw them into you. You want to make this work accessible to people and excite people, and that's kind of our success story, I think. I don't know. We're very successful.
Okay, I have a success story, and this involves RAC. I was part of a curatorial team this last summer that worked. We wrote a grant. It was through Orlo. Orlo is an environmental organization here in town, and we wrote a grant through RAC and got funding. And got funding through other people, businesses, architectural firms throughout the community, and we put on a show called Spanning Boundaries. And Spanning Boundaries involved. We did a call for artists throughout the Northwest and California, and we invited 4 artist groups to do site-specific installations on the urban growth boundaries here in Portland. And due to funding from RAC and help from the community, we got this off the ground, and it was so much work. There was a team of us. There was 6 people on this team, and it was a whole bunch of work. And this lasted the summer long, so you could go to these different sites, visit these installations, and all of them talked in different ways about the urban growth boundaries. It was great because not only was it relevant to our community, but it was relevant to a problem and an issue that's pertinent to lots of communities out there throughout the United States and abroad. So at the end of the show, we did a closing exhibition at the Feldman Gallery, and this is what I mean by saying, you know, this is a great thing that we have a place like the Feldman Gallery, because nobody else would have shown it. So all these artists came in, either did installations, did documentations of their pieces that were on the site, and it was a month-long closing exhibition, so people who couldn't get to the sites could get to this show. And when we were talking before, I guess I'm going to digress, but for me, one of the most important things as an artist is that there are opportunities for me to show, that I can go and take my projects and go and say, gosh, you know, here's my idea, be it a curatorial or be it for myself, and have that option. Many times when some of these shows aren't based on a sculptural thing or something you can get money back from, you need support. places like the Feldman Gallery are really important, but the Feldman Gallery, after this year, doesn't have any funding. And to me, that's very sad, because that means shows like ours might not ever have a chance to exist. And I think it was not only a wonderful experience for the artists, but a terrific experience for the community. So that's my success story.
Let's see. I guess my success story is probably my success and failure stories are the same story, so I'll just sort of different phases. I also, a few years ago, was involved in a group show where we got a grant from RAC, a small grant to mount a show with about 7 people in it. At the time, that in itself was a huge success. I mean, previous to that, most of us didn't even know that the Regional Arts and Culture Council existed, and then suddenly, like, we're all presented with a few $1,000s and we're able to mount the show that we really had in our minds. And, you know, we ended up getting big press in the Oregonian, like big pictures of us in the paper and everything, and it was great. But then afterward, so, you know, there was this kind of anticipation that we're all like, wow, you know, we've made a big step, you know, what might happen next? And the failure of the story, I think, is that really nothing happened after that. We got our show, and then I think really the only opportunity that came out of it was to donate art to an auction, you know. And there was really, you know, in a more, I don't know, in a town with more opportunities. I mean, most of the art, admittedly, was not the kind of stuff that is going to show up in the galleries because it was totally commercially unviable. But ideally, there would be places that one could go with those ideas, and you know, opportunities that would develop out of, you know, a successful show like that. And so anyway, there was success and failure in that, and it was a learning experience.
I think that Mary Kay should have hit up the City Club for underwriting for the Urban Growth Boundary show. So a little late for that pitch, but I bet it would have worked at the time, you know. Yeah, there are increasing venues and opportunities, which is good. And in a way, it's up for the artists to help lead those, but to also tell the community, in a sense, what we need to keep doing what we're doing. The story I would tell is about a project that we're actually in the midst of, and part of my job with it has been head cheerleader and occasional go-go dancer and theater of the absurd performer for the Lovejoy Columns project. And I don't know, to give some background on it, when the city a few years ago decided to redevelop the former rail yards that was Cooch's Addition, they wrote up the covenant with the developers who had bought the property, and part of the deal was to take down the old Lovejoy Viaduct. And that viaduct had been built in the late 20s by Commissioner Lardgard, I think was his name. That was a red light district in Portland at the time, and it spanned the rail yards. And we knew that as the neighborhood was going to develop, that you know, there's this incredible industrial aura that Portland has, and it's either going to be completely wiped out, or we could do something to at least indicate that history. Well, lo and behold, back in the 40s and 50s, this Greek immigrant named Tom Stefopoulos had done a series of incredible paintings underneath the ramp, on the pillars of the ramp. And he kind of turned this space into this maybe highly unorthodox, but a Greek temple nonetheless. And people have adopted it rather, as part of Portland mythology. And I think that you know, a lot of us in this room have probably fallen in love with those paintings at one time or another. Strangely enough, where Riga came in and where I came into the story was about 2 years ago, when we first learned about the imminent demolition. You know, we asked the question a lot of people ask, hey, what's going to happen with these paintings. And we actually went to one of the developers in the neighborhood and said, well, you know, what about doing something like this and saving a piece of it and not cutting the whole thing down, but saving the section with the paintings, diverting traffic around it and making it an urban gateway. It would be Portland's industrial Arc de Triomphe, if you will. And strangely enough, people actually liked the idea. So we were encouraged to go around and show the idea and meet with the neighborhood and talk to the city commissioners and the people at the Department of Transportation and anyone and everyone who would listen to us about the ideas to do this. After about 6 months, it was clear that while there was a lot of sentiment for the idea, it wasn't practical to pull off that version of it. So we did what any good spiritual persons would do under the circumstances. We held a eulogy for the ramp, and figuring that was it, this thing was coming down. And strangely enough, we were encouraged to keep going after the eulogy, to revisit the efforts, and that's exactly what we did. We rolled up our sleeves and put together a group of experts that could make kind of appropriate aesthetic decisions, if you will, about the future of these paintings and make some kind of recommendation in the language that the transportation department could read and could deal with. And so that was our learning curve as a group of artists and architects. We actually worked with a demolitions contractor, an art conservator, the head of RAC, and a structural engineer, and came up with a proposal for how to save these in a way that they would continue to be aesthetically useful, so that there was this willpower in the community and with the city government and with the local Department of Transportation to actually save the paintings, but our attitude towards it was that we could actually do better than simply saving the paintings. What made them amazing was the entire space that they were painted in, which I don't know if you can see from the very back, but this is the underview of the ramp before demolition, and then this is a view during demolition. You can actually see the paintings wrapped and protected, and what that means is eventually the Department of Transportation, through Charlie Hales' office, accepted our recommendations, and once that happened, it was utterly an amazing event. It was done with absolute precision. These demolition crews were like ballerinas. It was incredible to see these giant machines actually eating this structure. I think I've got another good shot somewhere. Ah, here it is. He's trying to steal it. Okay, there we go. So what happened at this point, and the reason we went to all this effort is because at this point, these columns are no longer a part of Portland or exclusively a part of Portland. They're actually a part of larger mythology, if you will. They kind of belong to a class of columns that could be anywhere. And they have a mythological characteristic about it. And we knew that if we fought to preserve them in this sense, they would tell an utterly stunning story in the future. And we're actually halfway into this project at the moment. They have been saved. They've been saved in a good fashion, so they'll be in good shape. They're wrapped in winter pajamas and stored over in the River District right now. And my company, Riga, we're actually working for the Portland Development Commission at the moment on ideas about where they're going to go next, how they're going to be re-erected, how they're going to tie back into the very neighborhood that they came out of. So we've been exhilarated because this is a project that has died many ungainly and embarrassing albatross-like deaths, and continues to come back, partly of its own volition, partly because the people in the neighborhood and the community care about it. So this is an instance where artists are actually out in front of a project, and we're using our aesthetic and vision and the ideas that we're getting from the community, because we're very open about soliciting everyone's input, and then using other people's expertise where we don't have it. If we need to talk to lawyers or demolition crews or conservators or any degree of expertise, we know that we can find it to make it happen. And it's a different model than the traditional public art model, which is in place. And I think hopefully that's going to be, it's halfway. We still have to erect them. We're looking at raising close to $500,000 to do it. But as a new urban gateway for the neighborhood, we know that compared to the hundreds of millions of dollars that will be spent, it's actually an incredible bargain for what's going in. So, I'm so pumped up about this one, I can't stand it, So thank you for, let's talk about the success stuff, because there is some amazing artwork happening in Portland. These folks are all at the forefront of it, and we don't have to emulate New York or LA to have some incredible culture being generated right here in our time, and to connect it to the community we're in.
But there's also a lot of stories that aren't so successful, and I mean that's part of the reason we're here today too, is to make sure that there are more successful stories and that there are more tales like we're told tonight, so that people have these opportunities to do things that on the surface might seem a little alternative, but are viable and important to a community and are important to the art world. So I think we need to kind of discuss both sides.
Yeah, I would agree with Mary that there is a balance between positive and negative in Portland's arts community, and we need to be aware of both of them so that the good stuff will come to further volition in life. But Trent, have you had any success stories, or what about in the performance world in Portland? Well, you're an artist, so I'll let you talk.
I think there's a lot of, it's very interesting for me to see how much we're coming together up here as a community. I hear all the same urban experience, mythology, all of these terms being used about up here, which are similar to some of the contexts that Liminal tries to work in, playing very near you for the next few weeks. Sorry, I tried to do a plug and it fed back on me. Where was I going with that? So it's interesting to see that we're all sort of in that same place, and I think there's a strong feeling that Portland's growing more and more open to it all the time. But one of the things I've heard that occurs very much in the performance community from John is that there is this threshold point where there's people like these artists, especially in the performance community, actors, artists who start something here, they get it going to a certain point, but at a certain point the community just doesn't give enough response for it to sustain it, and they move on and they move out. And there's a whole context to creating this art in Portland that's hard to take to other places. Is there sort of a similar, I guess this is my question, is there a similar language to artists in Portland that keeps you here because you want to participate in that language? And where, if so, where's it come from, and where's that going to go as our scene develops?
Well, I think that raises some interesting issues, and it's something that I think about a lot in editing this magazine, which is at once grounded here, but also is for a more, hopefully, general and non-local audience. I don't know. I mean, yeah, it gets really complicated. I grew up here in Portland and moved back here after going to college, and partly because I think I think we're at an interesting moment on a kind of larger historical level that makes that makes regional art making interesting and that makes working outside of major media centers interesting. There's so much pressure, I think, right now to think in terms of global opportunities and multinational flows of things that just the idea of attending to really local histories becomes a kind of politicized act in a way, and I think it's something probably that James and Riga deals with. I mean, by really attending to a place like Portland, I think there's a choice that one is making, and a kind of focus that you can't really have if you're thinking purely in terms of, you know, the international art world or the Whitney Biennial or something. I mean, it becomes a really sticky thing because there are kind of amazing opportunities to develop a regional language, but then, I mean, there is an impulse to try and bring that elsewhere and to try and make other people understand what your particular region is about. And it's, I mean, it's something that the magazine deals with in, I mean, yeah, trying to make this region and our syntax interesting to other people. I mean, I think that's an interesting problem right in itself, and I think it's something that that I don't see dealt with that explicitly in a lot of artists here. And I think, yeah, it could be maybe more explicitly taken up at moments.
I actually think this is a good time to have this conversation, because when you look at art in a bigger context, as not just Portland, but all over the place, all over the world, there's definitely a drive towards regionalism. You see now there's not just New York, but there's British art, there's French art, there's big movements in Australia, there's important things happening in Japan, in all these different areas, and maybe I'm citing countries, but it's the same way with some place like Portland, or Houston has a very big regional art scene right now. Actually, I think you guys had a writer from Houston recently, Bill Davenport. Mm-hmm. So while I think that there are certainly regional sensibilities all over the place, this is a great time because these artists from all over the place are showing all over the place, and although they may have a regional voice, usually there's something in that voice that resonates to everybody. Just because you come from a region with certain, you know, and you're maybe discussing issues that are relevant to your region, doesn't mean they're not relevant to other regions as well. And I think Portland definitely has artists doing that.
What would you say then is a kind of unique element to a sort of voice here? I mean, because that's where I sort of start to worry a little bit, where it's like, I don't see that many artists that are really trying to develop something that is unique to here. I mean, I think there are a lot of artists that, I mean, either blithely just sort of go ahead with whatever they've been taught in school, or they try and work too hard to tailor it for a kind of larger, more generalized audience. I mean, how do you see?
One of the things when I moved here from Philadelphia, I'm actually from Wisconsin. I moved out east after school, then I moved here about 8 years ago. And one of the first things, before I really knew anybody here in the art scene, that I kind of noticed, and I came here like during grunge music period. This is a rainy place. It's dark a lot of the time. And I've kind of noticed, in a sense, that there is a bit of a dark sensibility within a lot of the art within this community. And myself kind of included, and I've become more so. you know, well, actually, the last piece was little. I had dealt with color recently, which was woo. But anyway, I think that's prevalent within the work, and maybe even a kind of dark irony, which you can look at. You look at the music that comes from this region, and it's similar.
Right, and I think it's evident in the music a lot more than it is in the visual arts. I mean, there's a kind of morbidity that I can think of only a few people really capturing, you know.
I think also it has, I'm sorry, but I think it also has to do with the kind of dialogue that we share right here. We all know each other socially, and we all didn't a few years ago. And it seems like because we're continuing to work on this in this underground way, and we're kind of gravitating towards each other, and there doesn't seem to be much distaste for one another. I mean, you know, it's like in other communities and other cities, you know, we all like each other. In other cities, the competition is fierce in a way that I don't find here. I feel a lot of support from my fellow artists. I mean, I've talked and worked with probably every member on this panel with a project for either of you or myself.
Do you think that competition, though, or that lack of competition can be detrimental? I mean, is there a sense that you know, there's not enough competition among?
Right now, because we're restless. All of us are restless. That's why we have so much attitude up here, and we still don't like, you know, the big museum, and we have all of these feelings inside of us. We're still pushing, and I think that right
but just,
now,
I mean, on the level of kind of honing the ideas that people have, I mean, if there's a bunch of people fighting over the ideas, do you think the actual expression of it improves, or?
No, there's just a lot more, you know, kissing up going on in other cities than there is here. Yeah, I think we're doing okay, and I think that it helps that we share this dialogue, not just with the four of us up here, because we're not all best friends, but other people out there, other artists our age or not our age, who are trying to do things outside of the system a little bit, continue to push each other, and that is only going to garnish us a little more attention. And if we keep complaining about not getting press from outside of the region or not having magazines come in from outside to review shows, someone is going to listen. Like Randy Gregg mentioning that we were surpassed is going to get some attention if enough of us keep talking about the same issues together.
I have to interrupt and digress back to something. I just started thinking about this as you were talking about the people at this table. Another thing about a lot of the artists in this city are transplants. There are a lot of, you are, you know, three of us up here, right over there, transplant, came to Portland because it's a beautiful, wonderful place. And, you know, that may play into that issue, because people aren't coming, they're coming here and adapting to an environment. They're also bringing sensibilities from outside of their environment. And there's a lot of people who are like that within the arts here, I think.
What I'd like to do is, I'd like to turn the restless artists over to you, and I'm sure you've got questions, perhaps pertaining to the work that's being done, or perhaps questions about how you get involved or find or seek out new emerging contemporary arts in the Portland region. So I'll turn it over to you. There's a microphone right here. You can ask any of us anything that you would like.
I'd like to ask all of you how you evaluate the critics in this town and respect. I'm a reader of the Scanner and of the Star. I think we've got a lot of wonderful neighborhood papers in this town, and then we have a dominant Oregonian. So what is your response to the critics?
I had a show in Houston summer before last. And it taught me an important lesson about criticism. When I got there, they had one critic. Houston's a huge city, and they have an incredible art scene. And they have several museums. They have a place called Diverse Works, very vibrant gallery scene, and a ton of artists working, and one critic. That's what they had at that time. They had lost 3. They had lost their weekly paper. And so here they have the DeMille collection. They have the Modern Museum. They have all these other large institutions, plus the galleries. So here they are, you know, with one critic. And then as they also have a magazine, not completely different to Plasm, called Art Lies, which is gaining more popularity. And I thought, and at that point, we had 3 people writing in our city, plus Plasm. And I came back thinking, you know, at least locally, there are definitely people are writing, at least on the visual arts. And that goes back and forth. Sometimes there's more and sometimes there's less. But it certainly, leaving that and hearing their situation made me come back and look at my situation a little differently. But that's talking purely local writing.
I think good critics are health of an art community, and you need, hopefully, different voices, bringing up different agendas, if you will. You know, I think we do have some really good critics, but you would hope that we could get some more. It's you know, finding a good critic is as difficult as finding a good artist.
I think what's
so
also
it's important,
though, It's not only finding good critics, but finding good editors who allow more space and opportunity for the critics to say what they want to say in the papers.
Inside of the community, but outside of the community as well. And I think that's important.
And we don't need movie reviews, you know, a play-by-play of what's on the walls and the color, you know, a critic is supposed to have some criticism in there, and even though it scares us to death to hear that horrible thing about how young we are or how, you know, our work doesn't say anything, it gets people out there to go see the work, and it challenges us to get a better review the next time. I mean, it doesn't have to be candy-coated, which I think that sometimes it is, not all the time. There are a lot of risks being taken in the writing. But it would be interesting to see more criticism and not necessarily, you know, little blurbs about each show.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are some real things lacking as far as criticism goes here. I think the Oregonian does a pretty decent job, sometimes a really great job. Willamette Week has seemingly almost no interest in visual arts whatsoever.
What is up with that? They can't.
They
can never get it together.
They just
on the arts front. Well, say for performance. I don't know how. You know.
With critics in the visual arts world, I think that sometimes the performance medium is totally ignored in the city as far as criticism.
Because as you were saying, the funny part is we have probably 8, if you counted them, theater critics in this community on paper, if we were to tell people about it. But there's really only one, because everybody else writes candy-coated book reviews, and that's just sort of par for the course, and it's a very small town in that way. Yeah. But it gives a lot of power to that one critic, to the one critic that's there, which is why he's so infamous and why so many people hate him.
And so many
because he's the only one in town, and write him letters and complain, because a lot of people care outside the theater community, I'm sure. That's why people write in. But we spend a lot of time dwelling on him because he's the only one who will write anything critical, and he gets way more attention than he perhaps deserves on that exact basis.
That can be good for an arts race, you know, like you've got this unified enemy, right? And so everyone has to pull their pants up to, you know, get at it.
I think Stefan is a total blessing.
I think he's great, and I think that he's paying attention to some of the lesser-known theaters that probably are doing better work than.
But I think his work would be much better received if it was part of a discourse, rather than what I think a lot of the theatrical community sees him as, is this sort of barking lunatic on top of a mountain, you know, handing down his dictates, and everybody goes, we don't, because it's not part of an interaction, a dialogue. It's this.
Give him enough space to elucidate on it more so that you understand where the arguments are coming from. So sometimes it does just sound like that barking without the opportunity to make it something bigger, a bigger dialogue. I think that Randy Gregg does a wonderful job of saying something intelligent.
Randy could write the New York Times. He's of a very high caliber. And I think the community's lucky to have someone who can go out of the community and bring that knowledge into the community. And he also, in a sense, advocates for interesting urban ideas, which is something that I think all of us are interested in.
He's really built a pretty amazing platform there for being able to engage in a really serious way with the artists and architects. Yeah. But I'd say another thing that's lacking here too, and this is something that Plasm seeks to stake out a little bit, but definitely there's never enough. There's not much in the way of an organ to discuss art in a more broadly regional way that's not simply about Portland, but that also draws in Seattle and Vancouver, BC, and even San Francisco. And
so in a way, we have more in common with Seattle and Vancouver than, say, Atlanta. Just on the surface of it.
Yeah.
You know.
I mean, and maybe it would be interesting. I mean, and there used to be a Reflex that did that, which actually Randy helped start.
I would seriously complain about that. There are some amazing shows that happen in Vancouver that we're never privileged to down here, because our larger institutions that could afford to bring down. They had a show on Cuban artists a few years ago. It was one of the best shows I've ever seen, but for political reasons, it wouldn't make it to this country. But you have to figure, Vancouver is the LA of Canada, right? so they get a lot of government support, and
Well, that's, I think, a big deal is they get a lot of subsidy, and they've developed a really amazing art
Right.
scene because of it.
and we should, I mean, once a show is put together, that's the hard part. Then getting a show to tour is actually something that institutions do want to do to help recoup costs of putting something together. You know, so I don't know, that would be a benefit to the city if there was more of a dialogue up and down
That's something that's
I-5.
particularly exciting to me right now. One of the reasons that we started the Metropolitan Art Studio here at the Standard Dairy is because not only did we want to give emerging artists the opportunity to have a place to show and do their work, but we were also hoping that somehow we could start developing in this circle of an art studio this amorphous thing that's developing in interaction with other cities. For instance, in Seattle right now, there's a group called Consolidated Works that is trying to put together visual arts and performance and music and film in a way that we would like to see develop with Mass in a later phase, and something that's happening with PICA in many ways as well. We'd love to see all of those things start to interact, start to exchange artists and share opportunities among each other so that we're seeing Seattle stuff in Vancouver and whatnot.
But that also goes back to funding. I mean, Consolidated Works Seattle has a pretty impressive funding system for the arts.
They've got a lot of money in general right now.
Right, and they do this thing called
Less
Poncho.
today than a week ago.
Poncho's an organization in Seattle that raises money just for the arts. They do it every year. They have a ball, and then they disperse that money to the various different organizations. And it helps fund places like Consolidated Works because it costs money to put up these shows, to do announcements, to do press releases, to get someone to sit for a whole month in the show. And they are funded, and that's, that helps.
How far
A whole lot.
We'll stretch $1. I mean, that's one of the amazing things. We're all coming at it from heart and from spirit and from a love of what we're doing, because otherwise we wouldn't be doing it. So it's really one of the most economically sound investments there is. For the bang for the buck that you get for supporting the arts is tremendous. How's that pitch?
We rarely pay ourselves.
Yes.
Yes. Well, more to the point, we are usually funding our own work, so we're pouring.
Funding ourselves.
We're seeking funding ourselves, and you'd be amazed at how much time it takes just to acquire the resources that you need to do this stuff. I would say sometimes it's 50% or more of the work.
It absolutely is. It's a business. It's just a creative business,
So it's important to fund these types of alternative galleries so that they in turn can fund the artists. With Spanning Boundaries, each artist, and it may not sound like a lot because most of them spent, and I'm not kidding you, spent like $3,000 to $5,000 on their summer project. And they each got $1,000. That's what they got. But it was something, And so if these places are funded, these organizations and institutions are funded, then hopefully they can go back and they can fund the artist. And the artist comes to them with a proposal and says, this is what I want to do, that they can help that artist make this dream happen.
I went to a dinner that was benefit for PNCA, and I was sitting at a table with someone who is familiar with both my day job and my artwork. And she said, oh, you shouldn't have any, you're still working there because you have these reviews and you have commissions. And I looked at her like, it's a blindfold, we'll come to your benefits and we'll talk to you about how great your work is. But I think they think there's some payroll company out there just sending us checks to do what we do.
Okay,
and
you got a good review.
yeah, and it doesn't work like that.
And we'd like to establish that tonight.
It takes a lot of hard work, and I'm not complaining that I have to work a day job. I'm just saying that there needs to be some recognition that people are doing this out of love.
The Turner Prize for emerging artists, and that's like 25,000 pounds. And there are, this is a very, very old gripe, and some communities have worked on it to different degrees than others, for sure.
We
over the
just got
course of time.
invited
So-
to speak in Canada next year.
Yeah.
And the first email was, please send us your rates for speaking and airfare requirements. And
Wow.
Topher and I basically did a little dance. We're like, we have, we
Yeah.
write grants and we receive them from RAC, and I am extremely grateful for them. But no one is asking us what our rates are. In fact, we have no idea what our rates are. So I have to call several people who could possibly have rates and ask them what ours should be. I mean, it just doesn't exist here. Right, exactly.
Okay, well then you charge $500. You know?
Right. I said, is that $3,000 each a piece for us to get our own private jet to fly us there, or what's the boundary?
I'm afraid this is going to end too soon, and you all referred to sort of a dark sentiment in Portland and a dark sensibility, but I'm wondering if that's the reason why you bring your own coffin to a panel discussion.
You hit the coffin nail on the head, actually, with that one. There is a line from Chekhov about don't put a shotgun over the mantelpiece in the first act if you don't intend to use it in the closing act. This is a model of the columns as they are stored in their graveyard right now. Our job is to get them to rise from the ashes, right? So this is column 3, this fancy number. Each one comes in at a hefty 25 tons, a svelte 3 by 3 feet in cross section, and anywhere from 25 to 30 feet in height. This column can be yours for $45,000. Yeah, literally, speaking of speaking engagements, my God, taking this around has been amazing. We're showing it everywhere. There's 10.
You don't go out after dark with that under your arm, do you?
I go out anywhere, but definitely it has to do with the dark sensibility that is, I think, an important aesthetic ingredient to the city. There is something moody and atmospheric about Portland. The background is gray. How do you make things look good against gray? Well, actually, gray's great with color. It makes color pop. We have no shadows in this town. I'm convinced that's why there's so many graphic designers here, you know. You know, we don't have the strong raking sunlight that's good for great sculpture. Yeah, this is what we're dealing with as works of art, if you will.
How many are there?
There's 10 columns left with yes, 10 left with 14 paintings on them.
You mean there were more?
We have no idea. There are areas that were painted over, and we don't know if there were paintings that were under or not. We do have, there are columns such as this one that represents overpainting that the city did on an anti-graffiti crusade, and we're going to try to remove that overpainting. We don't know if we'll be able to do it successfully or not. I'm putting the conservator on the hot seat, you know, but she's really good. She restored the Astoria column out of the coast. We have a practice column. We nicknamed this one Pay Dirt and Lucky Strike because it's the one the demolition crew practiced on, and it doesn't have any paintings on it. So we might be able to do something a little more inventive or absurd with this particular one. Like this one, Sacred Heart with Coffins is our nickname for it. It has, there's clearly a Christ figure surrounded by a curtain, and you see the little Sacred Heart in it, and then 2 little coffins at the base. And this is one of the paintings that we have no real information on what it was when he painted it back in the late 40s, early 50s. So this will be a real challenge to breathe new life into it. There's other ones, such as this particular one, that you can see the slight overpainting marks on it. This one was actually overpainted by the city. The neighborhood got up in arms about it, then yelled and screamed. The city came out, scrubbed it off. It took the painting off. Now the painting's on the column in reverse. It's a negative image of what was there. And each one has an incredible story like that. This one is completely overpainted, except for this one little triumphant branch that we noticed one day sticking out of the top. And if it hadn't been for that one arcing branch, this would have been munched with the other ones that didn't make it. So definitely an instance of, it's not public art, but it'll be art out in the public once it's all done. So.
I have a feeling that James could talk for hours about
and I
the columns.
apologize for that, you know.
No, I think it's
I
fascinating.
do weddings and bar mitzvahs and funerals.
We'll have to ask you your fee.
It's exorbitant.
Well, I want to thank you all for coming out. I think our time is running a bit short. Gosh, I feel like we could go on for hours here. I'm sure that we're all just now bursting with new things to say. But it certainly has been a stimulating hour and 15 minutes. And I'm sure the artists wouldn't mind hanging around in the crowd for a few minutes afterwards. Yes, we also have some plugs here for you. Billy Reed's is open for business, so if you'd like to have dinner, please feel free to do so. There are First Thursday events going on all around in the Standard Dairy Complex, which is a great, cool building with a lot of stuff going on. And
which means that you have a nice way to kill the next 45 minutes before you all rush over to the Liminal performance tonight, right down the way that I...
Right at the Metro Art Studio, right next door, Liminal is doing their current production at 8 o'clock of Peter Hanke's play, The Hour We Knew Nothing of Each Other.
Please tell people it's not just this hallway, but there's some outside.
Absolutely. This building goes all the way around. So there are plenty of galleries wrapping entirely around. So, and thank you very much for coming, and thank you City Club for putting this event together. We certainly do appreciate it. So, have a good evening.